The crisis began, as these things usually did in the galaxy, with an underfunded mining operation cutting corners until the corners cut back. On the barren, metallic hydrogen-coated moon of Shriek's Folly, a name that really should have warned everyone involved, the Calarian mining colony was hanging by a thread. Their atmospheric stabilizers were failing, their southern dome was cracking, and worst of all, an alien biological organism was busily chewing through the colony's infrastructure like it had just been told it was an all-you-can-eat buffet. The Calarians sent a distress signal to the Galactic Council. Help! Dying, very tragic, please send assistance, preferably something not horrifying. The Council, in its infinite wisdom, took approximately 37 hours to draft a resolution, form a quorum, argue about fiscal responsibility, file some paperwork about said arguments, lose that paperwork, and then finally, vote to respond. By then, the colony's life support reserves were down to emergency oxygen, plus prayers. So the Council activated its emergency response protocols, which is why, 3 days later, Squishy McTendril, first Navigator Zilix of the Calarian colony, found himself standing in the bridge of the crumbling colony's command center, staring at the transmission they'd just received. You're telling me that humans, actual living, breathing, biological humans, are coming here? The words slipped out of Zilix's mouth, higher pitched than usual, his bioluminescent markings flashing bright yellow, which in Calarian physiology was the rough equivalent of screaming in terror while also throwing up. Yes, replied Captain Vine of the colony, in her usual maddeningly calm way, her 4 eyes blinking rapidly in what anyone who knew her could recognize as intense anxiety. That's what the transmission said. The Galactic Council approved their response to our distress call. The humans were available. Oh, great. Like choosing between suffocating slowly or sticking your tendril into a meat grinder and going while it was available. There, Deathworlders Zilix hissed, tendrils curling tight against his thorax. Class 12. Did nobody find that relevant when they sent out our SOS? They evolved in conditions that would liquefy our internal organs. Their homeworld is a death trap, even their plants eat meat. Their oceans are full of monsters with 300 teeth and no souls. Their skies have storms that shoot lightning sideways. And their continent-sized ice sheets occasionally decide to murder everything for fun. Who approved this? I believe the general understanding, Captain Vine replied, mandibles clicking in what Calarians called a sardonic smile, was that we needed help. Immediately. And they were the closest ones who volunteered. Oh, how reassuring, Zilix deadpanned. A diplomatic vessel, crewed by apex predators. What could possibly go wrong? From her post at the communication station, Officer Nix spun her chair around with a sort of giddy amusement that made Zilix wonder if she was secretly trying to get him eaten. Her bioluminescent spots pulsed a perky lavender. Actually, she chimed in, according to the transmission details, they're sending a ship called the Relentless. That stopped the entire room cold. Relentless? Zilix asked faintly. That doesn't sound very diplomatic. The humans insisted it was the closest vessel that could reach us within the time frame required. Vine explained, looking like she was trying very hard not to smile. Apparently, it's some kind of rescue ship. Ah yes, Zilix muttered. Nothing says we come in peace like naming your rescue ship after a personality disorder. Fantastic. At that, Nix's spots went full violet, which was as close as Calarians got to hysterical laughter. But even sarcasm couldn't disguise the facts. The mining colony was running out of atmospheric stabilizers. Over 200 colonists were still trapped under the collapsed southern dome, and the native organism, affectionately nicknamed the Hungry Purple Bastard, was dissolving filtration systems faster than they could replace them. If help didn't arrive soon, they were all going to find out what decompression felt like from the inside out. So Zilix sulked in a corner and tried to ignore the growing existential dread humming in his thorax. Then Nix announced brightly, "Oh, Captain?" The humans adjusted their estimated arrival time. Vine's outer eyes blinked in surprise. Adjusted? To what? Nix beamed. They'll be here in 2 rotations instead of 6. Zilix froze. 2? Yes, first navigator. That's impossible. Even with advanced drives, the nearest jump point is 4 rotations away. They said, and I quote, "Hold tight, we're taking a shortcut." A hush fell over the room. Zilix rubbed his tendrils down his face and muttered to nobody in particular, "Oh good." Because nothing screams responsible professionals like faster-than-physics shortcuts. On board the Relentless, however, humans were already treating the impossible as Tuesday. Commander-elect's Smile Vulkov, standing on the bridge of a ship with his arms crossed and his face set in a faintly amused glare, looked more like someone waiting for his coffee than a man about to hurl his crew through a star-choked debris field. "Talk to me, Lieutenant Reed," Volkov said, his voice calm and cold enough to make the Calarians shiver light years away. "Sir," Reed replied, fingers dancing over her hollow interface. "We've got a bad situation on Proxima Centauri's outermost moon. Colony's got 800 personnel, landslide triggered by local instability, 200 trapped, unknown biological agent eating through their systems. Life support estimated to fail in 9 days. And we can reach them in 2 if we take the Kuiper belt shortcut," added navigation specialist Kowalski, already grinning like an idiot. The room went silent at that. "Through the debris field?" someone asked faintly. "That's insane," another added. Volkov finally smiled, a small, sharp, wolfish expression. "Insanity," he said softly, "is relative, especially when measured against alien standards." The humans immediately got to work. Atmospheric converters prepped. Methane-compatible life support protocols ready. Rescue modules armed. Everyone moved fast, efficient, and alarmingly cheerful about the prospect of throwing themselves into a minefield of ice and rock at relativistic speeds. Meanwhile, Volkov stood quietly, watching his crew, and muttered, "Just loud enough for the ship to hear. These aliens think we're monsters. Let's show them that sometimes monsters are exactly what you need." Back in the Calarian colony, Zilix could already feel his bioluminescent stress patterns spiraling into a migraine. The humans were due to arrive in less than 2 rotations, apparently, by punching reality in the face and demanding right-of-way. And when they got here, they would be breathing oxygen like psychopaths, walking around without environmental stabilizers, and probably calling the native death mold cute. Fine, fine. But when these nightmare apex predators arrived, Zilix resolved he'd be staying right here, inside his protective suit, with a stun pulse in one tendril and an emergency escape plan in the other. Let the humans do whatever insane, death-defying heroics they wanted. At least one of them was going to be smart enough to cower responsibly in the corner. Probably. Maybe. Well, we'll see. By the time the Relentless actually arrived, the Calarians were already halfway through drafting their own eulogy. Navigator Zilix stood in the command center, flanked by Captain Vine and the ever-too-cheerful communications officer Nix. The colony's remaining functional screens flickered between warning alerts. Oxygen depletion, critical biological contaminant, spreading, and stop panicking, too late, and a single transmission feed showing the humans' approach. And what an approach it was. One moment the starfield was empty and peaceful. The next, space itself seemed to wrinkle like a piece of fabric being twisted by some malevolent toddler, and then a ship materialized. No, not a ship, a predator. It was sleek and angular, matte black against the stars, with faint blue pulse lights coursing along its hull like veins. Its surface was studded with armor plating and strange modules whose purpose Zilix could only assume involved violence. It didn't so much glide into orbit as stalk there. Zilix's internal temperature dropped several degrees. By the ancestral mists, he thought, that's not a diplomatic vessel. That's a murder machine with better manners than its owner. Captain Vine, as usual, managed to sound unimpressed. That's the humans' rescue ship, she said. Zilix turned to her, incredulous. That, he said, gesturing at the screen, is not a rescue ship. That is a nightmare given thrusters. That is a weaponized intimidation device that somebody accidentally labeled ambulance. Vine tilted her head slightly and quirked her mandibles in what Zilix had learned to recognize as the Calarian equivalent of a shrug. The humans, she replied dryly, specialize in emergency response because they evolved on a planet that's constantly trying to kill them. It only makes sense that their equipment reflects that. Oh sure, Zilix muttered. Nothing says, we're here to help like something that looks like it could eat our moon. Actually, Nyx interrupted, grinning as her bioluminescent spots pulsed. The name of the ship is the Relentless. I checked. Again. Zilix groaned and buried his face in his tendrils. The Relentless hailed them moments later. The main view screen fizzled to life, revealing a human. It was worse than Zilix expected. The creature was tall, taller than any Calarian, encased in an environmental suit that was somehow both gleaming and menacing. It had a smooth, transparent dome over its head, revealing its face, disturbingly flat, with a protruding central ridge and two forward-facing eyes that locked on you like a predator assessing prey. Zilix shuddered. Greetings, Captain Vine, the human said. Its voice was clear, steady, and somehow both polite and slightly threatening. Commander Vulkov of the Earth Emergency Response Vessel Relentless. We receive your distress call. We are here to render assistance. Captain Vine pressed her limbs together in the formal greeting gesture. Commander Vulkov, she replied. Your prompt arrival is most appreciated. Our situation has grown dire. The human smiled. A smile, as Zilix knew from the xenobiology briefings, was meant to indicate friendliness. Unfortunately, on a predator, it looked like a warning that you were about to be eaten. We're aware of your situation, Captain, Vulkov said. My team is preparing to deploy rescue modules that can withstand your moon's geological instability. We've also brought atmospheric stabilizers compatible with methane-based life support systems and a suite of biological countermeasures for your spore problem. Zilix couldn't help himself. You just happen to have all that on hand? He blurted. Volkov's predatory gaze swung to him. First Navigator Zilix, I presume? Zilix froze. Ah, yes. The human nodded, as though confirming the presence of something he fully expected to find. The Relentless, Vulkov continued, is designed to respond to emergencies across multiple species parameters. We carry modular systems that can be rapidly configured to most known biochemistries. It's literally our job to be prepared for anything. Zilix resisted the urge to crawl onto the nearest console. After some further terse and thoroughly unsettling discussion, the humans requested permission to bring their ship into low orbit and dispatch their advanced team to the colony's command center. Captain Vine, to Zilix's absolute horror, agreed. 6 hours later, Zilix found himself waiting in the colony's main docking bay, trying very hard not to hyperventilate. Vine, of course, was calm as ever. You volunteered for this, she reminded him, clearly enjoying his misery. I volunteered to observe, Zilix muttered. Not to welcome Deathworlders in person. Same thing, Vine said serenely. The Relentless shuttle arrived with all the subtlety of a meteor impact. It was sleek and black like its parent vessel, and even smaller, which somehow made it look even more dangerous, like a compact weapon waiting to unfold. The hatch hissed open, and the humans emerged. Leading them was Vulkov himself, even more imposing in person. He was followed by 4 others, a towering woman with what looked like a mobile laboratory on her back, a short, wiry man carrying enough tools to disassemble the colony if he felt like it, another who moved with predatory grace and was clearly armed, and one who was scanning everything in sight with a device that beeped ominously. Zilix noted that each of them carried equipment cases that would have required at least 2 Calarians to lift, and they carried them one-handed. Vulkov stopped before Vine, nodded respectfully, and spoke. Captain, thank you for receiving us. I trust the methane-oxygen mix we're producing is comfortable for you? Perfectly suitable, Commander, Vine replied smoothly. Zilix noticed, with some irritation, that the humans had adjusted their suits to emit a methane-rich atmosphere around themselves. A small gesture of goodwill. Infuriatingly thoughtful. These are my senior officers, Vulkov continued. He gestured to each in turn. Lieutenant Reed, my second-in-command. Dr. Okafor, xenobiologist. Chief Engineer Daniels. Lieutenant Kowalski, terrain specialist. And you must be Navigator Zilix, he added, turning those unsettling forward-facing eyes on him. Zilix nearly tripped over his own tendrils, but managed to croak out a greeting. Vulkov studied him for a long moment and then, disturbingly, smiled. I understand, the human said, that you successfully navigated the Fanony Nebula? Zilix blinked. You know about that? We make it a point to study the achievements of other species, Vulkov replied, especially when they involve navigating through environments that try to kill you. It's something of a hobby for us. Zilix felt his internal temperature spike. Alarms began blaring before he could process the compliment. Southern Containment Dome has lost pressure, cried a voice over the comms. Atmospheric venting in sectors 7 through 12. Zilix felt his thorax tighten. Even so, the humans barely flinched. Read Kowalski. Stabilizers, Vulkov ordered immediately. Daniels. Emergency seals. Okafor. Biological countermeasures. Captain Vine, we need to move now. But, Zilix began. The southern quadrant is decompressing. Vulkov cut him off. We're equipped to handle vacuum and contamination. You're not. Let us do our job. Vine inclined her head. Very well. First Navigator Zilix will accompany you. What? Zilix squeaked. You'll learn something, Vine said sweetly. Vulkov glanced at him, raised a single eyebrow, and said, Stay between Reed and Daniels. Do exactly what we say. Don't die. Understood? Zilix straightened his tendrils as best he could and forced himself to nod. Understood. Volkov's expression was unreadable, but it might have been respect. As they moved into the southern quadrant, Zilix caught a glimpse of the humans in their element. Weapons slung casually at their sides, portable atmospheric generators already humming, thermite charges prepped, and heavy boots clanging against the deck as if they owned the place. For creatures evolved on a planet where everything wanted to kill them, they moved with a calm born of familiarity. And for the first time since the colony began falling apart, Zilix felt a tiny spark of something he hadn't felt in days. Hope. Because sometimes, when death comes knocking, you don't send diplomats. You send humans. You send the Relentless. And heaven help whatever's in their way. By the time Zilix actually stepped into the collapsing southern quadrant, he'd already cycled through every possible excuse to back out. None of them worked, because Volkov's response to his panicked looks was simply, Don't worry, Navigator. You'll either adapt or you won't. And then he kept walking. The southern dome was chaos. Emergency lights pulsed blood red across the floor. The faint hiss of leaking atmosphere gave everything an ominous rhythm, and Calarian colonists scrambled frantically through the corridors like startled prey creatures. Which, to be fair, was entirely accurate. The biological contaminant. The hungry purple bastard, as the humans had dubbed it the moment they saw it, was visibly growing now, spreading over the walls and floor in slick, web-like strands. Every few meters, the dome's structure groaned like some ancient beast being slowly digested from the inside out. In other words, a typical Tuesday for humans. Daniels, Vulkov said calmly as they approached the first breach, Give me a structural integrity read. A human engineer, a short, broad-shouldered woman who looked like she could wrestle a gravitic stabilizer into submission, consulted a handheld device. Commander, she said in the kind of cheerful tone one uses to announce their own funeral, integrity's sitting at about 23%. With the organism attacking load-bearing components, we've got maybe 90 minutes before this section comes down entirely. 2 hours if it's feeling generous. Then we work fast, Vulkov replied. Zilix was unprepared for how methodical they were. Lieutenant Reed and Kowalski had already set up the portable atmospheric stabilizers at the main ventilation nodes, apparently unconcerned about the way the floor sagged with every step. Okafor, the xenobiologist, was scanning the nearest cluster of the organism and muttering things like fascinating and possible colonial intelligence and, disturbingly, might even be edible. And Vulkov moved like he belonged there. While the Calarians skittered back and forth in varying degrees of panic, the humans walked with a predator's confidence. Slow, steady, watching everything, assessing threats as though the universe itself were just another sparring partner to outmaneuver. Zilix had to admit, albeit very quietly to himself, that it was impressive. At one point, Daniels discovered that the primary seal controls, the only way to re-engage emergency bulkheads, were located directly under the largest breach in the dome. Too dangerous, the Calarian technician chittered, his antennae quivering. You'll never make it through the decompression zone alive. Daniels smirked without looking up from her schematics. Oh, honey, she said, our suits have survived open vacuum, submersion in liquid ammonia, and being gnawed on by an apex predator native to Gliese, 581G. This is just brisk weather. Zilix muttered something about lunatics under his breath, but Daniels was already jogging toward the breach, toolkit in hand. At the hydroponics lab, where a large group of colonists was trapped, the situation had already deteriorated into textbook disaster territory. The transparent dome overhead was cracked, its fractures webbing outward in a way that looked almost deliberate, and the organism had made itself quite at home, crawling across the ceiling like some sadistic chandelier. Several dozen colonists huddled in the center of the room, while a handful of maintenance technicians tried to reroute atmosphere into their sealed corner. Their bioluminescent spots flickered faintly, the Calarian equivalent of "we are so doomed." When Vulkov strode in with his squad of Deathworlders behind him, all conversation stopped. Reed started her head count immediately, shouting out numbers and giving orders like she owned the place. Daniels ran diagnostics on the remaining structural supports, muttering something like, well, it's still technically standing. Barely. Okafor fired her alkaline sprayer into a patch of the organism to test its reaction. It recoiled with a screeching hiss. Effective, she announced, but limited supply. Prioritize clearing a path to the trapped colonists. Yes, ma'am, Vulkov said dryly, clearly used to his team, ignoring the fact that he was technically in charge. Zilix stood uselessly at the back, watching the humans in horrified fascination. These people weren't afraid. They weren't even rushed. They moved as though everything, the organism, the collapsing dome, the dying atmosphere, was just another day at the office. When Zilix finally spoke up, his voice cracked. You can't seriously be planning to go deeper into this quadrant. It's already beyond containment. The structural integrity. Vulkov cut him off with a look that should have been patented for use in intimidation training. Navigators stay in the corner, he said. Monsters get to work. Then he barked orders. Okafor, clear the organism near the main seal. Daniels, override the bulkhead controls. Reed, start moving colonists toward the exit. Kowalski, plot the fastest evacuation route. And you, he turned those sharp, forward-facing eyes on Zilix. Don't die. Zilix swallowed and nodded meekly. 15 minutes later, the humans had cleared a path through the infestation, patched one of the atmosphere leaks, and evacuated nearly half the colonists into safer corridors. Zilix was begrudgingly impressed. Again, quietly to himself, he followed closely behind Reed and Daniels, trying not to stare too hard at the way they each carried two full-size Calarians over their shoulders while simultaneously barking instructions and spraying down the walls with corrosive compounds. These suits, Daniels remarked conversationally, are reinforced with nanoceramics. You could fire a meteor at me, and I'd still get up in time for lunch. Good to know, Zilix muttered. When they reached a narrow section of the corridor, a violent tremor shook the entire structure, knocking Zilix off his feet. Reed caught him without even looking. Careful there, navigator. Floor's hereby back. Why are you people like this? Zilix groaned. Reed smirked. Why aren't you? The final stretch was the worst. The main bulkhead to the hydroponics lab was jammed, and the creature had grown over its control panel like a particularly ugly barnacle. Okafor sprayed it with her last reserves of alkaline solution, while Daniels ripped open the manual override and started hot-wiring it with what looked suspiciously like a multi-tool and a healthy dose of profanity. In the end, the bulkhead slammed shut, sealing the organism outside. The colonists were safe. For now. Zilix stared at the humans, dumbstruck. They were coated in dust, their suits scratched and dented, their oxygen meters flashing angry red warnings. But they just kept going. They even smiled. Situation stabilized. Vulkov announced calmly into his comms. Evacuation of Southern Quadrant in progress. Remaining colonists accounted for. Commencing Phase 2. Captain Vine's voice crackled back. Phase 2. Saving your whole damn moon, Vulkov replied, deadpan. When they finally stopped to take stock, Zilix found himself staring at Vulkov. You people, he began. You're not afraid of anything, are you? Vulkov looked at him for a long moment, then gave a slight, humorless smile. Oh, Navigator, he said. We're afraid of everything, but we don't run from it. We schedule it. And with that, he and his team turned and walked deeper into the chaos, as though the danger wasn't waiting for them, but because it was. Zilix remained standing there in stunned silence, the faint glow of the organism behind him, the humans already vanishing into the smoke ahead. And for the first time in his life, he thought, maybe being a monster isn't such a bad thing. The Southern Quadrant had been stabilized, which in human terminology apparently meant still falling apart, but now we're smiling about it. Zilix sat on the edge of the evac platform, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. Humans tearing through catastrophe like it owed them money, sealing breaches with what he swore was duct tape at one point, and cheerfully ignoring gravity, atmospheric collapse, and a carnivorous mold as if they were minor inconveniences rather than, certain death. At least half the colonists were now safely sealed in northern sections of the colony, and the others were being herded toward the landing pads. Meanwhile, Vulkov and his crew were still deep inside, doing whatever it was Deathworlders did when they weren't actively terrifying everyone else. Zilix was almost starting to believe they'd pull it off, that this nightmare would finally end. Then the southern dome collapsed. The entire colony shook so violently that even the humans momentarily stopped swaggering. Through the observation window, Zilix saw the dome give way. A deafening roar, followed by a bloom of glittering dust and the hungry screech of the organism as it surged into the breach. It was gone. All of it. The hydroponics, the trapped colonists who hadn't yet been rescued, the structural supports, the emergency bulkheads. Obliterated in seconds. And somewhere in there was Commander Vulkov. Zilix stood frozen as Captain Vine's voice crackled over the comms. Status? Status of the human team? Commander Vulkov, report. Nothing. Just static. 5 minutes later, the humans made their way back. -1. Reed carried 2 young colonists under her arms, her face grim and silent. Daniels and Kowalski were hauling their remaining equipment, while Okafor trailed behind with a scanning device that beeped mournfully. The landing pad was quiet when they arrived. Everyone knew. Everyone could see it in their movements. Deliberate, heavy, devoid of that unsettling confidence that usually clung to them like armor. Zilix stepped forward before he realized what he was doing. Commander Vulkov? Reed paused at the foot of the ramp. He stayed, she said finally, her voice flat. He stayed behind to detonate the thermite charges and hold the organism off while we got the colonists clear. And? Zilix asked weakly. Daniels glanced up at him with a look that could have frozen plasma. And the dome came down on him, she said. You do the math. The humans didn't cry. Not here, at least. They just worked. Because of course they did. Reed and Daniels coordinated the remaining evacuations with Vine's command center. Okafor checked over the rescued colonists, scanning them for contamination and treating wounds with mechanical efficiency. But every time Zilix looked at them, he saw the same thing in their eyes. Not fear, not despair, but quiet fury. The kind of fury that doesn't burn out. The kind that sharpens. The kind that scares even other Deathworlders. They got everyone onto the Relentless shuttle with seconds to spare before the moon's crust cracked and the southern hemisphere began to disintegrate into a molten slurry. From the observation window, Zilix watched the ground collapse, sending plumes of superheated dust into space, and he thought about the human commander, the one who'd smiled at him while doom literally fell around them, who'd torn a tendril of the organism in half with his bare hands. They had asked for help. The humans had sent a monster, and he had died doing what monsters do. Except, 3 rotations later, The Relentless detected an anomalous signal. Zilix was dozing on a bench in the corner of the command deck when the alert klaxons went off. Reed lunged for the comms panel, so fast her chair spun. "Talk to me," she barked. "Lieutenant," came the voice from the bridge crew. "We're picking up an emergency beacon, originating from surface of the moon." That got everyone's attention. "Impossible," Vines said flatly. "The surface collapsed hours ago. There's nothing left down there." "Confirmed," the technician replied. "And yet, beacon is broadcasting. Standard Earth EERV signal. Weak life signs nearby." Reed's head jerked up. Her expression sharpened like a blade. "Location," she snapped. "Northern quadrant," the tech replied. "Inside what appears to be a natural cavern system." The humans exchanged glances, and for the first time since they'd returned, something like a grin cracked across Reed's face. "Prep rescue module 2, she ordered. "We're going back." Zilix blinked in disbelief. "Going back? The moon is literally collapsing." Reed didn't even look at him. "That's right," she said. "We're going back." The rescue module was smaller, faster, and somehow even more dangerous-looking than the Relentless. It launched with the subtlety of a cannon shot, engines screaming against the turbulent atmosphere of the dying moon. Zilix, who, through some incomprehensible lapse of judgment, had volunteered to come along, was regretting every decision he'd ever made. "Why am I here?" he hissed at Reed, clutching his seat as the craft bucked and rolled through gas vents. "Because you volunteered," she said, deadpan. "I was tricked." Reed actually smirked at that. "Welcome to the team." When they touched down, if you could call slamming into the only stable patch of ground a landing, the beacon was still pulsing faintly from a cavern entrance 20 meters away. Life signs, weak but present. They moved fast. Daniels monitoring structural integrity, Okafor scanning for the organism, Reed leading the way with a light that cut through the toxic haze. Inside the cavern, the air shimmered with methane-rich vapors, and the walls glistened with alien hydrocarbons. At the bottom, they found him, Vulkov. He was propped against a rock, his suit blackened and torn, clutching the emergency beacon in one hand and a jury-rigged oxygen mask in the other. When the light fell on him, he stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Took your sweet time," he rasped. Reed crouched beside him immediately. "Commander," she said, voice low, "we're getting you out of here." "Colonists?" Vulkov croaked. "Safe," Reed assured him. "Thanks to you." He coughed, but the corner of his mouth quirked upward. "Good. Then let's finish this." Of course, nothing about the rescue was easy. On the way back to the surface, the cavern began to collapse. The organism surged through cracks in the walls, and the exit tunnel half-caved in behind them. It got worse when tendrils of the organism appeared ahead of them, blocking the way. Okafor's scanner beeped furiously. "It's reacting to our heat and carbon signatures," she said. "Brilliant," Daniels muttered. "It wants to eat us." Not news. Then Zilix. Because by now, he'd apparently caught the human disease of recklessness. "Step forward. Maybe it prefers Calarian biochemistry," he said slowly. Everyone turned to look at him. "You're suggesting it ignores humans in favor of you?" Reed asked. "It's a theory," Zilix admitted. "Worth testing." "Navigator," Vulkov croaked from behind them. "You've been spending too much time around us." Zilix almost smiled. Apparently. Before anyone could stop him, he darted ahead, waving his bioluminescent limbs and shouting to draw the organism's attention. The tendrils whipped toward him instantly, ignoring the humans. "Move," he shouted over his shoulder. "Get the commander out." Reed hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "You heard the Calarian. Let's go." They ran for the exit, dragging Vulkov with them, while Zilix led the creature down a smaller side tunnel he'd noticed earlier. It was narrow and steep, too small for humans, but just big enough for a desperate navigator being chased by a colonial death mold. When he finally burst out onto the surface again, gasping for breath, he realized two things. One, the ground beneath him was starting to crack open. And two, the rescue module was already lifting off. Of course, because humans always cut it close. Then the module swung back toward him, engines flaring, and the side hatch opened midair. Inside, Reed stood in the doorway, secured by a safety line, one arm outstretched. "Jump!" she yelled. It was at least a 4-meter gap. Impossible for a Calarian. But then again, hadn't Vulkov once leapt farther in worse conditions? Zilix bunched his tendrils, summoned every ounce of strength, and launched himself into the void. For a moment he was falling. Then, unbelievably, Reed's hand clamped around his tendril and hauled him aboard like he weighed nothing at all. "Cutting it close, navigator," she said, smirking. Zilix collapsed onto the deck, gasping. "I learned from watching humans." Vulkov, half-conscious but grinning faintly, let out a horse laugh. "Welcome to the club." Later, as the Relentless lifted off and the moon crumbled into dust behind them, Zilix stared out the viewport, still trembling from adrenaline. The humans, battered, blistered, half-broken, sat quietly in their seats, already running through checklists and coordinating the next evacuation steps as though nothing unusual had happened at all. And for the first time in his life, Zilix thought, maybe being a Deathworlder isn't about where you're from. Maybe it's about what you do when everything wants you dead. And with that thought, he smiled, just a little, and let himself breathe. It had been 3 weeks since the moon imploded in what humans cheerfully described as an aggressive structural failure, and everyone else sensibly called the end of the world. The colony was gone. The hungry purple bastard was, mostly, burned away. 83 Calarian colonists now floated aboard a massive orbital platform en route to a safer sector, all alive, largely thanks to the humans. Zilix stood on the observation deck of the platform, staring out at the stars. In the near distance, the Relentless hung in orbit like a silent predator, its running lights glinting cold and blue. Somewhere deep inside that ship was Commander Vulkov, alive, against all odds, against reason, against physics if Zilix was honest. And for reasons he still couldn't entirely explain, Zilix felt something, a sharp pang of regret that soon the humans would leave and the Calarians would go back to their carefully ordered lives, pretending they'd never seen what real monsters could do when properly motivated. The door behind him hissed open. "Navigator Zilix," came that familiar growl of a voice. Zilix turned to see Vulkov limping toward him. His movements were slower than before, his skin still blotched with burns that even human medicine hadn't fully erased. His environmental suit was gone, but he still radiated the same quiet, feral confidence that made everyone in the room stand up a little straighter. "Ah," Zilix managed. "Commander Vulkov, I thought you'd already departed." "Not yet," Vulkov replied, joining him at the viewport. "The Council wants us to remain in the sector for a while. Apparently, someone thought our performance warranted a permanent human presence." Zilix snorted before he could stop himself. "Can't imagine why. You only saved everyone's lives, discovered a new organism, and defied a dozen natural laws in the process." Vulkov actually smirked at that. All a day's work. They stood in silence for a moment, watching as a supply shuttle zipped between the platform and the Relentless. Then Vulkov spoke again. "I came to make you an offer," he said. Zilix blinked. "An offer?" "The Relentless needs a new navigation specialist," Vulkov said matter-of-factly. "Someone who knows this sector. Someone who's already proven they can keep their head when the universe tries to kill them." Zilix stared at him, thoroughly disoriented. "You want me? On a human ship? Why not?" Vulkov replied evenly. "You've demonstrated the qualities we look for: intelligence, adaptability, courage. That you're not from a death world is irrelevant. Hell, might even be a bonus." Zilix gaped. But I'm not a Deathworlder." Vulkov raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you?" Zilix opened his mouth to argue, and stopped. He thought about the collapsing tunnels, the choking gas, the searing heat, the writhing organism, and himself sprinting toward the chaos when every rational instinct screamed to run the other way. And he realized, painfully absurdly, that maybe Vulkov was right. "When would I start?" he asked before his brain could catch up. Volkov's grin was all teeth. 0800 tomorrow. And fair warning, Reed runs a tight training program. "I'd expect nothing less," Zilix replied dryly. Vulkov clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder. A gesture Zilix now recognized as friendly, though it still nearly knocked him over. "Good man," Vulkov said. "Report to the Relentless at shift start." Then he turned to leave, but halfway to the door, Zilix called after him. "Commander, that saying you told me about courage not being the absence of fear." Volkov paused, glancing back. "What about it?" Zilix straightened his tendrils, his voice steadier than he expected. "I think I finally understand what it means." Volkov nodded once, his expression warming. "A rare thing. Welcome to the crew, Navigator." 3 months later, the Galactic Council received an emergency transmission. "This is the Earth Emergency Response Vessel Relentless, responding to distress signal from Sector 9. Spatial anomaly threatening the Zenturi colony. Please advise all vessels to clear the area. We're going in." In the background of the recording, analysts noted something odd. The calm, authoritative voice of a Calarian officer providing navigational coordinates with the kind of steady confidence usually reserved for humans. Zilix's voice. When he'd first stepped aboard the Relentless, Zilix hadn't expected to last more than a single mission. It turned out, surviving humans was just another skill you picked up if you hung around them long enough. He was still learning, of course. Learning to double-check everything, because humans always assumed equipment would fail at the worst possible time. Learning to keep his bioluminescence dimmed, because the humans found it distracting during stealth ops. Learning that Deathworlders consumed caffeine, a literal chemical stimulant, in alarming quantities, even in life-or-death situations. And above all, learning to stop asking why every time the humans did something reckless. Because the answer was always the same. Because we can. His first official mission as part of the crew had gone something like this. A Zenturi colony on the edge of a gravity well had accidentally destabilized it with unregulated mining. Predictably, the Council's response was to monitor the situation. The Relentless, predictably, just showed up and started fixing it. The Zenturi governor, a pompous six-legged bureaucrat who smelled faintly of ammonia, had confronted Volkov the moment they landed. "You have no jurisdiction here," the governor sniffed. Volkov, without missing a beat, pointed at the roiling anomaly behind him and replied, "Neither does physics. We're here anyway." It was inspirational in a terrifying way. Zilix had quickly learned how to navigate the Relentless internal chaos. Reed drilled him on emergency protocols with the ruthless efficiency of a predator training its cubs. Daniels constantly tried to get him to carry her tools, claiming he needed the workout. Okafor spent hours explaining how the hungry purple bastard had technically been a fascinating discovery of a novel synthetic consuming extremophile colony, while Zilix tried very hard not to faint. And Volkov kept watching him quietly, measuring him against some invisible standard. Apparently, he passed. One night, or whatever passed for night, on a human ship. Zilix found himself alone on the bridge, running a simulation of a hazardous starfield jump. He caught himself muttering something humans always said when faced with absurd odds. "Danger is just opportunity wearing a scary hat." He froze mid-sentence. He'd said it without thinking. He meant it. And somehow, without his permission, he'd started sounding exactly like them. When they received the next distress call, a full planetary evacuation from a collapsing gas giant station, Zilix was at his station before anyone else. Reed gave him a quick glance and a faint smirk. "You're keen," she said. "I'm learning from the best," Zilix replied without missing a beat. When Volkov arrived on the bridge, he took one look at the navigation plot already lighting up on Zilix's screen and said only one thing. "Good man." On the way to the anomaly, Daniels cornered him in the maintenance corridor and handed him a small metal pin. It was shaped like a tiny predator, sleek and black, just like the Relentless herself. "What's this?" he asked, confused. "Your badge," she said gruffly. "You've survived 3 missions without bursting into flames, freezing solid, suffocating, or crying on the floor. Congratulations, you're one of us now." Zilix stared at the pin, then at her. "You're joking." Daniels grinned wickedly. "We don't joke about that." Later, when the ship's loudspeakers announced their arrival in Sector 9, Zilix caught his reflection in the viewport. His bioluminescent spots were steady, calm. His posture was straight. He looked different, and for the first time in his life, he didn't see prey staring back. He saw a Deathworlder. One of them. The Relentless dropped out of FTL with its usual theatrical disregard for subtlety. Below them, the Zenturi colony glimmered against the swirling gravity storm. On the bridge, Vulkov stood the center, arms crossed, radiating that infuriating, terrifying calm. "Talk to me," he said. Zilix spoke up before anyone else. "Plotted 3 viable approaches to the anomaly, Commander. Fastest route minimizes exposure to the gravity distortions, but," he glanced at the display, "requires some aggressive maneuvering." Volkov's lips quirked upward. "Sounds like my kind of plan," he said. Then he leaned slightly toward Zilix and added quietly, "Show me what you've got, Navigator." Zilix felt his tendrils twitch in something dangerously close to pride. "Yes, sir." As the Relentless surged forward, straight into the teeth of another impossible catastrophe, Zilix caught himself thinking back to his first words upon learning the humans were coming. What could possibly go wrong? Now he knew the answer. When you send humans, nothing goes wrong. Not for long. Because they don't just face the impossible. They schedule it. The distress signal had reached the Deathworlders. And once again, the galaxy hadn't sent help. It had sent the Relentless. And this time, Navigator Zilix was leading the way.